And then just welcome everyone to Power Building, Trust, and Co-Creation, the role of Community Action Team in Equitable Grant Making. Thank you so much for joining this session. We'll begin in just a couple of minutes. Thank you so much.
Omar, are you able to see the chat in Pathable at the same time? Okay.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. My name is Omar Woodard. I am a proud board member of the Philanthropy Network Greater Philadelphia. I am a board member of the Independence Public Media Foundation as well. And in this role, I've been a facilitator for the Dr. Frank E. Boston Black Justice Fund of HealthSpark Foundation. Today, we have an amazing panel that makes up not just HealthSpark Foundation staff, but also members of the community action team that help to develop the kind of mission, vision, values, and focus for the Dr. E. Boston Black Justice Fund. So a little bit of what we're planning to do today is to just share with you how it is that we came to get to this work and develop this work. You'll hear directly from some members of the community action team exactly what it took in order to build some of this work out and really what they're looking forward to do in the community going forward. We hope that we'll have just a very kind of candid dialogue about what it took to build this, as well as what it might take to sustain this work. And you'll also hear from HealthSpark Foundation staff about reflections of their insights, what it took for them to engage in this work as an observer and really begin to look at themselves in the context of not just ceding power and sharing power, but what power means and what it could look like in community. So very thankful that you all are joining us and very thankful for our panel and the work. What you have here is a very simple and very relevant, I think, phrase. I think many of us in philanthropy are aware of it. Over the last year or so, it's become more important that we're really trying to understand the root causes of why injustice exists in the first place. And that can be very, very uncomfortable for folks for whom getting to this point of being philanthropists has really been the ideal. It's really been the goal, to do well and to be in a position to help your community. That's the ideal journey. But there are many things about that journey that have advantaged others and disadvantaged others. And so there's a need to really understand deeply a lot of this work. And that's really been the guide for us, is to connect deeply to those who are closest to the pain, which you'll hear soon, and really understand and frame our solutions, our work, our activity, and our building in that context. So I hope you have a wonderful discussion today. I'm happy to be moderating this discussion, facilitating it. And Chinwe, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Omar. To underscore, we're really thrilled to be able to be in conversation with all of you this morning and to share our learning and insights. My name is Chinwe Onekri. I serve as the Director for Equity and Inclusion at the HealthSpark Foundation. And we wanted to, I just want to provide a little bit of background related to our journey at HealthSpark and the creation of the Dr. Frankie Boston Black Justice Fund. We've been on a path of really thinking about how we can center equity and justice in our work and thinking about how we create a resilient safety net. We've been focusing on how we reframe our positioning, our grant making to center social justice. And we've been really thinking about how we can center the community voice in that work. On the last 5 years, we've been focusing through our Safety Net Resiliency Initiative and our Build Back Better work to focus, to listen to the community. And we heard directly from the community for us to be a thriving and just safety net within Montgomery County, that it was critical for us to target our funding and to think about our grant making in new ways, particularly focusing within the Black community within Montgomery County was pivotal. And so we really was a charge to action for us to do our work differently. And the creation of the fund is really a direct response to what we heard from our community. And in addition to thinking about how we could direct funding and resources to the Black community within Montgomery County, it was also critical for us to continue on something that's really important to us as a foundation and have it be community driven and community informed. So we received support from our board to allocate $250,000 over 2 years to the Black Justice Fund. Really, that was where we got that initial funding, and then the staff and the team took a step back, and we wanted to center community voice in developing the purpose, the focus, and the theme of the fund. We thought it was critical for the community to highlight all of these components of the fund and provide directional insights into how we would launch this. We also wanted the fund to have a bit of a gravitational pull to attract others, and to do that, we knew it needed to be community led. So we really were blessed to have a phenomenal cohort of community action team members, 3 of whom you will meet during our conversation today. And we had really diverse representation from faith-based organizations to philanthropy, to higher education, to healthcare, to community organizing. And these 11 members really have driven the themes, the purpose, and the mission of the fund. One of the grounding positions when we launched the fund, and really has said central, is something that Omar mentioned, is this quote from Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, that those closest to the pain should be closest to the power. And so the role of power and centering power, Black power, liberation, justice, are themes that you are going to see throughout our conversation this morning. And this grounding quote, I think, allowed us to really understand, well, what does it mean to center power in thinking about building a thriving and a just safety net within Montgomery County and for all the community. So with that, I will pass it to Omar to highlight our Black Justice Fund and our purpose and mission.
Thanks, Chinwe. So on this slide, what you'll see is a kind of a series of sentences, but it really broke out into 3 core pieces, really 2 whys and a what. And the development of this, of what you see here, took 5 meetings, 2 hours each, of trust building, of getting to understand what some of the root challenges and causes facing Black people in Montgomery County, not just those who happen to be left having lower incomes in Montgomery County, but the fullness of Blackness in Montgomery County, regardless if it's not Norristown or Lower Marion or elsewhere. And so it was a very, very thoughtful process and engaging process. And everything that you see here are words that came not from the foundation or not from me, but from the community action team. Chinwe, if you go, thank you. So as we focus on this slide here, I just want to take a step back and remind everyone of why we named this fund Dr. Frankie Boston. So Dr. Frank Boston was a World War I medical officer in the U.S. Army. He was a physician, medical doctor, and he was decorated. He left the Army with the rank of major. And when he left, he came back to Lansdale in Montgomery County and founded Elm Terrace Hospital in 1935. And Elm Terrace Hospital grew and grew and grew to become North Penn Hospital, for then Lansdale, then North Penn Hospital. North Penn Hospital sold, many of you may remember, in 2001 for several $1 million, upwards of $80 million. And part of that was creating a health conversion foundation, which was really the beginning of North Penn Health Foundation, Community Health Foundation, later HealthSpark Foundation. So you understand the importance of identifying the historical nature and connecting historical memory to the present to create greater understanding. The challenge here was that no one really knew who Frank Boston was. They knew that Elm Terrace was founded. They knew that someone was involved in it, but not in 1934, a Black medical doctor as responsible for it. So the importance of naming this and connecting the historical memory of Frank Boston, his legacy, his work, it continues to this day. And so it was important for us to identify the fact that Black folks and Black talent and Black achievement has existed in Montgomery County for a very, very long time. And it's of course part of the work the fund will address. Chinwe, on the next slide, that's the why of Dr. Boston. But the focus and purpose of Black justice as inclusive, was to do three things in particular. To focus on emerging Black leaders, right? Black leaders who are generally overlooked, underinvested in order to support their work around social justice and racial equity in Montgomery County. But to the other point, positive storytelling, continued conversation about Black communities and achievement in Montgomery County, not just individuals, but communities. And then finally, trying to identify, right, really the underpinnings of Black community, Black infrastructure, Black-led organizations, Black serving organizations, and how might this fund enable greater cohesion and coherence across those organizations and greater collaboration across those organizations. All of these ideas came from the community action team, was developed through the community action team. And it was incredibly important to just highlight not just the why of Dr. Boston, but also the why of Black justice and what it seeks to, and what we're seeking to accomplish. On the next slide, really it's like how, kind of think about how did we get here on this push of power? Why are we focusing on power? And it's really around this issue of the historical exclusion of Black communities and Black leaders from the levers of power in Montgomery County, and having the control and the ability to shape their own communities and have an impact on what happens to them. And that was very much a focus of our work in the community action team, is having control and agency in your own community and being able to connect. And so we looked at a number of different frameworks for that and what it could look like in philanthropy to actually engage a community action team to evolve this group into grant makers with a focus on building power in communities that they're in. Very quickly, I can just show you through this framework, the group began to focus on the areas of framing, which of course is focused on storytelling, right? Who's involved, who's not involved, and why, pointing to history and understanding the role and elevating the role of Frank Boston, and understanding there are probably other stories like Frank Boston that aren't heard. So how do you frame those up? And the other piece where there was a particular focus for this group was in the area of constituency. And so, of course, leadership development, right? Focusing on emerging leaders and building structures so that leaders can be connected and their networks can be enhanced as a result of participation in this type of initiative. Next slide, please. So, as we talk about grant making and power building, it's like, wow, these are all, community members. But just because someone is a community member doesn't mean they don't have actual expertise in grant making and in this work. And so it was a great joy to have a very diverse group, but in particular, Vanessa Briggs, who was able to add her insights, not just personally, but also professionally as a grant maker. So Vanessa, I'll turn it over to you to provide some insights around your thoughts and how the community action team began to use power making as a frame for its grant making.
Thank you, Omar. And this is really near and dear to my heart, being part of this action team. And as Chinwe mentioned, it really was a cross sector of community members, residents, leaders, all coming at justice and Black liberation from their lens, their lived experiences, their professional experiences. And so this particular conference, held by Philanthropy Network, is made up of grant makers and nonprofits. When you think about how you're going to seed power in order to advance justice and liberation, as the Dr. Frank E. Boston Black Justice Fund aims to do, you have to start thinking about grant making and doing grant making differently. And I think that there have been many sessions in this particular conference talking about trust building philanthropy. And I like to think, even in Chinwe's earlier slide, when she said, we heard from the community that this is something that we needed to do and they wanted to take action. And then they looked back at their history and came up with this particular fund. And so trust-based philanthropy at that point was being formed before we even formed the community action team, if you will. And so from that, centering community voice in the idea creation, HealthSparx may have had the fund named and heard the community to say that this is what needs to be done. But what really happened is the community action team was charged with centering their voice in idea creation of what this fund could look like, who we were going to fund, what we were going to fund, and we nailed it down in terms of the specific areas as Omar talked about, but more importantly, grant making and resource allocation. And that's critically important when you're really trying to break the status quo of traditional grant making. And that's really what we were aiming to do. And this is really going to be stemmed on how are we changing the trajectory, not only in the allocation of resources, but changing the trajectory of oppression and marginalization among Black communities in Montgomery County. And so grant making had to shift and begin to look at it a little bit differently. And the constructs of that, I think, as our community action team started to think about, well, what would this look like? It was really hinged on deep relationship building that was among the community action team, which we know is part of a trust-based philanthropy approach. But the caveat is it really was about authentic community engagement. It really was about HealthSpark seeding their inherent power as a grant maker and entrusting this group to come up with not only the mission and the vision, but the how and the what we were going to be doing. And it's about looking at the community from a lens of respect and not suspect, because typically that's what sometimes grant makers may do. And so this whole notion of authentic community engagement was grounded in how we're going to continue moving forward in our grant making and building power among the community. The power that needs to be built among the community, I like to say, it's not building it's not building power for the community, it's building on top of what the community already has. And they come with a set of assets that oftentimes are underlooked and underutilized. And I do believe that this community action team comes with an inherent sense of assets and capacity. And so it's just, how do you maximize that and then build on the skills that one would need to be a grant maker? And that's really what we're aiming to do with this particular fund. I'm not going to get too deep into trust-based philanthropy because I think, as I mentioned throughout some of these other sessions, people are talking about trust-based philanthropy and how we're actually going to do the work. But more importantly, I mentioned that through HealthSparx, what was really impressive is their ability to seed the power and really allow this community action team to own it, to voice it, and to make sure that all perspectives were heard. And I believe that in our mission statement, it is truly a collection of diverse perspectives and voices, which is really good. The other part of this grant making really is about access to philanthropic capital, because we know historically as grant makers, there has been the traditional way to give funds out through a grant, this laborious process, et cetera. But more importantly, this particular fund, I believe, has set the stage for a model to really break the status quo of traditional grant making and giving the decision making in terms of resource allocation in the hands of the community in order for them to come up with their own community solution building. The prior slide, I think Omar had up, when we think about constituency, it really is sitting the decision making in the hands of the community. And that's what that community action team is set up to do. It really is looking at how we framed it and centering the community's voices, not only just the voice, but their experiences, and how this fund is going to really liberate Black communities within Montgomery County. And then when I think about sort of the tactics, it really is like, what is the Dr. Frankie Boston Black Justice Fund? How is that going to break the status quo and traditional grant making, as I said? And it is about a shared vision that the idea may have been sparked, hence HealthSpark, but the idea creation really came from that community action team as HealthSpark ceded their power to allow power building to take collectively across the community action team. And so when we think about grant making into the future and trying to address both justice and liberation, it really is sort of how do you interconnect both what the community knows that they need, but then also allowing grant makers to trust that process. So I'll end on that note, because this particular topic is near and dear to my heart, but it's been a joy to be part of this action team, this community action team, and you'll hear more from some of the other members.
Mark, I'm gonna turn it over to you. You've said a lot during our community action team that it's really about, before you can talk about power building in community, you have to model it. You have to show what's possible. And so if you could talk to us a little bit about your experience going through this process, creating space, kind of lead, direct, and build, and kind of understand what power building tools you needed in order to go back and figure it all out.
Right. So thank you. It's an honor to be here. I would say being a part of the process, and I've spoke to this in many of our meetings, right? The process itself was power building that I think some of us that were on the community action team didn't even realize initially was going to be the case. And I just think the ability for us to, the community, and I've heard the word used before, like, has been excluded, right? So community folks like myself are just a regular, I wouldn't say a street organizer, but I'm a community organizer, community activist. Most of the individuals that I deal with are grassroots people that are doing work within their communities just out of their own free time, just like taking away from their families in order to do stuff that's community centered. And those people had typically been excluded from these type of conversations. Those people are excluded from accessing funds because a small organization with only 4 guys in it or 4 women that are trying to do something for the community, probably they don't have a grant writer, right? It's very hard to have these things, so they don't get any extra help. But going back to the power building, just being, I think, while I don't believe that money resolves all the issues, I do believe that money helps to empower individuals that otherwise have been excluded, who every small organization comes up to a point where, well, what are we going to do today, right? Like somebody who's been giving us 40 hours of their time every week kind of has to go back to work to support their family. How do we how do we keep this work going? Or we have these young kids, and we know this the Norristown School District is short on books, and we have these young guys that want to provide books, but where do we get the books from? I know of a program in Norristown that does mentoring to juveniles within Norristown, right? 1 day a week. They try to feed the kids when they come, go over. They've had judges come out and talk to kids about jobs and, criminal justice, education, all type of different things. And it always looks great. And people say, yeah, great job. But those young men are doing it from their pockets or from the community, right? They put out a message once a week to the community to ask for donations so that they could feed those kids every Thursday. Some of those kids, that's probably the only place that they come to every week where they have positive growth interactions. So things like this, these type of spaces, it makes young men, I'm one of those young men. I helped found the program, right? My life is so much easier if I don't have to argue with my wife at home that I spent my last $200 instead of doing something I'm supposed to do at home, right? To give to these young men so that they could feed those kids on Thursday because nobody else could respond this week, right? So that was empowering for me. And being a part of the group, I was empowered in knowing that this type of thing was coming. And actually somewhere, somebody, whether it was Chinwe, right? Or Chinwe's boss, somebody decided that the community needs to be a part of the decision making. And that's really how you empower people, right? For years and forever, we've just always gone along with do what they tell you to do. Here goes money. We're going to distribute it to these same big programs that have been doing the same work in these communities, but we're still in the same place, right? And at no point were the voices of the people that were directly impacted before the money and would be directly impacted after the money. Nowhere were their voices centered. So there's no empowerment in that. In this process, I know for myself, right? If I talk to anybody about this fund, when I talk to some of the younger organizations that are going at it and people feel like they want to quit, I can smile and say there's people somewhere that are actually starting to hear. And maybe there's a new framework coming that will empower you. So just being a part of the decision making, sitting at the table, having the dialogue in itself brings power. The actual philanthropy, again, empowers individuals that are at this work. So that's my take on what we did as far as bringing power goes.
Mark, thank you for that. What you were talking about too is philanthropy at its most base level too, right? It's individuals coming together, whether mutual aid or otherwise, to pull out of their own pocket because they see a need. And at some point, you get to a ceiling with that type of approach, and you need more collaboration, more funding, more support in order to grow. And that rarely happens, right? With the folks you're talking about. So I really appreciate that. Kemma, would love to have you talk a little bit about your experience on the Black Justice Fund, Dr. Eve Austin Black Justice Fund, but also kind of you've done a lot of work in the community in Montgomery County connected to education and elsewhere. So we'd just love to get your overall insights and reflections on your participation, but also the space that this creates around community voice.
Absolutely. Thank you, Omar. And thank you, Chinwe. And thank you for having us participate in this conversation with you today. When someone tells you how to tell your story, they've immediately changed the story, right? They've changed the context. They've changed even the outcome of the story because they've dictated to you how the story gets told. And one of the things that we were clear needed to happen in this funding opportunity is that the community is experiencing whatever they're experiencing, so they get to tell their story, their narrative in whatever ways resonates with them. And so how do you translate power of narrative in something that's concrete? Well, you find different ways, different opportunities, different intersections for this funding to be able to amplify the work that's being done. For some people, it will be a matter of developing themselves as leaders who are able to articulate the story of their community. For others, it will be building the capacity for their work so that they can continue to go out and feed 500 students, seniors, homeless, whomever, instead of the 50, because all their pockets could manage were the 50. Or perhaps it's bringing other people to the table. Your table used to just be whatever that corner post was that you were standing up on. But now you can join other areas, other communities, other tables to be able to amplify the story of your community and make aware those people what is happening in your community and why you and it matters, right? And so the Frank E. Boston Black Justice, and I hope that you hear that in this explanation, we constantly use the full name. We name him and we name what we're doing, because part of amplifying your voice, part of giving the community its voice is calling them out in the ways that they want to be called out. Right? So his mama named him Frankie Boston. So we're going to hold on to that name and we're going to be willing to boldly say Black justice, not in dispute any other justice opportunities. We're not denying that anyone else deserves justice, that anyone else deserves to no longer be marginalized or oppressed. But what we are saying is that it is important for us to name that Black justice is a thing, and that we acknowledge that it exists. And so serving as an example, a platform, a way for others to be able to do philanthropy in partnership with the people they are saying they are purporting to want to support, to be able to give them the resources so that they can do with the resources what they believe is most important, is what we are trying to be an example of and do. And the way we believe that you do that is by amplifying the narrative, by allowing people to tell their own story, just giving them a platform to do it, by empowering people, by giving them access to resources. It's not saying that people will not be held accountable, but they will tell us what they are trying to do, and then we will support them in that so that we can hold them accountable to what they said that they want to accomplish, not what we believe that they should be accomplishing, right? And then it's giving them the opportunity to figure out what spaces they want to be in and how we can leverage our good skills, abilities, talents, whatever it may be, whatever those resources are, to be able to have them have access to those tables. And so that's what it really means to do philanthropy. It means sharing of your talent, your time, and your resources, right? Your treasures. It doesn't just mean being the Lord of the money. And so what we are trying to do is remove being the Lord of the money, being the Lord of the resources, and getting down into the work with the people who we want to support in the communities we want to support.
So you see how we got to this point, right? We got some amazing members of our community action team to work together for several months to coalesce around, a clear idea, right? But the vision has always been a vision of justice and liberation. It's always been focused on what's far ahead of us, where we need to be ideally, in order to recognize the impact of a historical exclusion and the need to mitigate it, act on it, eradicate it, dismantle it through the ways that we're spending these dollars, and through the ways that we're hoping to enable folks to tell their own story and begin to build vehicles for power building in community. So it's been a joy just to facilitate this conversation, right? I've been facilitating, a number of these community action teams where all I do is recap word for word the brilliance that comes from them. And I think if we begin to think about it in that way, one last takeaway before I open it up to questions and answers is HealthSpark Foundation was an observer throughout the entire process. They were welcome to speak. They didn't insist on it. and they were invited into conversation when appropriate. And that level of agency and the balance of power was identified up front, saying we wanted a different dynamic, and that dynamic played out and has continued to play out. And look, that's hard to do. A lot about philanthropy will have to change as a result of this new dynamic of seeding relationships, seeding power, doing this, and we're going to learn through that. But I have to say that HealthSpark has been an observer at this table, not the driver. And that has been unique in my experience. I know a number of community action team members feel the same way. So the goal has to be justice. It has to be liberation. And with that big goal, we can collaborate and move forward. So one last thing before I turn it over to questions and answers. You may see all of us wearing blue. I would like to tell you that that was strategic and thoughtful. It wasn't. We all woke up this morning and got on and said, oh my goodness, we're all wearing blue. But you also see that the slides were blue. But you should also know that Dr. Frank E. Boston, in addition to founding Elm Terrace Hospital, which became Lansdale, which became North Penn, he also founded the Volunteer Medical Services Corps of Lansdale, which still exists today. And the insignia that he developed, the motto was loyalty, mercy, and humanity. But the insignia itself was blue and gold. And it represented the colors of the state of Pennsylvania. And so it's about telling a story. This thing that he created pre-World War II still exists and still serves people to this day because he found a need. It's stories like that need to be told. Social entrepreneurs like him who existed in the 1920s need to be told because the impacts of their work continue to this day. So thank you so much. We're happy to answer any questions. What I'll do is I'll start with a couple, I think, of questions in the chat. One from Caitlin who says, this is so powerful. Are there plans to endow the 2-year fund so that'll continue? Chinwe, what do you think of some of the thoughts around the 2-year fund and how we might think about it going forward?
That's a great question. Thank you so much for that, Caitlin. I think we knew and we know from that the 250 is just the start. And the community action team has been very clear that there's a desire to pool funds, that we want to bring additional resources to this, to amplify it, to make it bigger, to think about sustainability. So we are very interested in models that allow us to bring additional resources to the fund, to grow it. Mark has been very clear that there's more money there. We can do more, and we've been taking that to heart. So we are very much hoping to grow it, and that was a key principle from the community action team, was to think about how this could draw and kind of be a gravitational pull for other resources and other supports in developing and doing more in this space. So yeah, absolutely. Do folks want to add to that? Cam, Vanessa, Mark?
No, I think that's good. We want more.
Meg has a great question. Adding on, I guess, to the prior question. So how has the community action team influenced shifted thinking within the foundation? Which is a really good question. Chinwe, I'll start with you, and then just to prep Kama, Mark, and Vanessa, some ways in which you may have seen HealthSpark change over the period, right? Ways they engage, things they've been thinking about. Just want to prep you for that. Chinwe, I'll start with you.
Absolutely. I think one has been our unabashedly kind of focusing and using language around justice and liberation. I think we talked a lot around justice and equity, but we haven't really focused on or highlighted or used language around liberation. And I think this provided an opportunity for us to go and dive into that full steam ahead and bring that language into all of it. And what does it mean to have a liberation frame to our grant making? And how do we do that across our whole organization, from our internal operations to thinking about our grant making application. I think the work that we're going to be doing with the Dr. Frankie Boston Black Justice Fund and our RFP is going to be powerful, and it's going to inform everything else that we do. And Vanessa asked the question, I think the first time when we got together for a community action team, like, how do you hope this will impact everything that happens at HealthSpark? And it was very clear that we wanted to infiltrate everything that we do from the learning that came from the community action team and through the Dr. Frankie Boston Black Justice Fund. So yeah.
I would say that from the external partner side, I noticed that Russ and Emma, through other work that we have been doing, other funding work, they have intentionally taken a backseat. They have quietly asked questions, right? I've had conversations with them about what can we do? How can we do it? How can we show up? And then I see the interpretation of that in the meetings that they have since hosted, showing that they are really trying to hear what the community is saying that we need, and then trying to be responsive to that. So I see that this idea is spreading throughout the organization to become a more common way of doing philanthropy.
Yeah. And I would add that what I've noticed throughout the many conversations that the community action team has had is that just in the space of philanthropy and knowing how resources were allocated, funding decisions made historically have caused harm to communities. And I've seen HealthSpark really not only just acknowledge that, but also recognize that these are tough conversations. And I remember distinctly one community action meeting that we had around including the name Black in the Dr. Frank E. Boston Black Justice Fund. And they encouraged and they supported, they heard the community, they encouraged. And I've seen oftentimes in philanthropy where people may want to sort of water it down and then embellish it using other words. And as Chinwe said, they are leaning very, very heavily into this in a county where sometimes it's not welcomed, but they are unapologetically doing the work in an authentic way. So that's what I've noticed over the series of meetings that we've had.
And Mark, I would add what the folks who spoke before me have said is absolutely it. I'd say the language and how. So I didn't necessarily follow HealthSpark before we started, right? But just in all of my other work and any of my other things that I've done, right, especially in social justice activism, you could sit at a table and you'd have a discussion about a statement that needs to come out, something that we're pushing out, and what's the reason for it, right? And it's, as Vanessa just said, like discussing using the word Black. And for me, in this process, I don't believe, in not knowing HealthSpark, I don't believe that if you looked within the history of statements that have come out from HealthSpark, things that HealthSpark has done, that you'd ever see the word liberation of a group of people within that language, right? Like, I'm sure people may have felt it when things were drawn up, right? But is that what we put out to the community to say, hey, this is how serious we are? And it felt great. I know when they first showed me the mission statement and stuff, like I was ready to cry just because there are so many things that are empowering to people who have historically been oppressed, marginalized, and ignored, right? And the ability to hear, right? So commissioners that come out and say, hey, we have this new funding source to help address diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's a great thing. It sounds great, right? But that is completely different than somebody coming out and saying, hey, listen, we have a fund for our Black communities to help liberate us and put us in a place that is going to keep us away from where we have historically been. That type of language has never been used before. And hearing that in this, it was empowering. And I hope the money keeps going. I'm an advocate for increasing it and in any way possible, getting money out there to communities, because people need to know that there are other people paying attention. Those guys that are boots on the ground. I know people that go to Norristown once a month and serve food and give out supplies at the transportation center once a month, completely just from folks, everyday folks collecting donations and going out there and doing it. Could you imagine the amount of work, as Kevin said earlier, they could do if they could do that for guaranteed 500 individuals a month? Like that is, it's so empowering. So yeah, I credit HealthSpark for allowing the community to dictate where this fund would go and what would it be used for and how it was going to be communicated to the community, like what the understanding would be that they wanted people to have about this fund.
We have another quick question from Chrissy. How was that community action team formed? Chinwe, could you start with kind of the early composition and development?
Sure. So we really just tapped into networks, and then networks and folks that we didn't know. And what was great was that it was a combination of folks completely, and what we wanted was that it would be a combination of folks that are completely new to HealthSpark. So I love that Mark was like, I didn't know HealthSpark before, but that's exactly right. And so we wanted folks that were connected in the community and did not have relationship with HealthSpark previously, but could come and inform and direct this work. So we really kind of just tried to tap in networks and tap into new networks to get advice and recommendations of who could join the community action team.
This is a heavy question from Jen, and I would like to take some time to talk about it, because community action teams spent some time thinking about intermediaries, right? And thinking about it as a strategy, right? Because of course it's about building long-term infrastructure. And so how can you kind of build that? There is not deep distrust is one. Another is just a lack of awareness and knowledge and relationship in the first place. And so it's both of those. Kemma, I'm gonna start with you. I'll move to Mark, I'll move to Vanessa. If we could talk just a little bit about that challenge of building trust between these institutions and some of what we learned and some of what we might have to think about going forward.
Yeah, as soon as I saw the question, I was like, "Ooh, call on me, Omar, call on me, because I know this one. Call on me." So interestingly enough, when we started doing this work, this was around when we lost our brother George Floyd, right? And I remember saying in a recent conversation that we came to the table to work on this, but it ended up serving as an opportunity for each of us to process what was going on for us. So there were a series of things that were happening in the community at the time. And as leaders, you don't always have a chance to process. Listen, I put on the face, I put on little earrings, I, put my oil in my hair, and I go on into these people's college and I help the students. I help my staff. I help the faculty. I do what I need to do to make sure that they can do what they need to do. But there's no space sometimes for me to be able to say, okay, I'm a Black woman and I'm tripping right now because I'm not quite sure in Montgomery County if the next time a police officer stops me for some old frag-a-naggle, if this is going to be the time, right? I need a place to process that. I didn't always think about needing a place to process that, because the other reality is the way your mother raises you when you're a Black woman is you just keep going and going and going. That's why we got mental health issues. Don't get me on that tangent. So having this group served as an opportunity to be able to process, to be able to talk about what I was feeling, how I was feeling, the fear, the anger, the frustration, the overwhelm, not the loss of hope, but maybe just the pressure of not being able to connect with the hope. So being able to build relationship with people who have deep mistrust for you means creating an authentic space for everybody to just be vulnerable in that space. And the conversation should be facilitated by an external party. This here, Omar, his facilitation is amazing. It's amazing because he does not take over your voice. He allows your voice to be whatever it is, and then he recaps to make sure he heard your voice. That's the power in building trust. Don't tell people what they're feeling. Ask them, is this what I'm hearing you say you're feeling? And then integrating that into the collective story that you all are weaving, that tapestry that you all are weaving. Then after you create that space, it's figuring out how you can get to a common mission. Why are you here? We went through that work of figuring out why we were there together, what pulled us into that space together, what caused us to want to be a part of this table. And when we found intersections in the space, we captured that and created our mission from that so that we could all have buy-in. So it really does require you to put aside, to suspend what you think has to happen and organically allow what will happen to be what happens. And if your mission and vision is focused enough on an area that resonates with people, they will get there. We didn't at the beginning call it liberation, but that's what we were talking about, so that eventually we could create the language around liberation that HealthSpark could say, yes, we can align ourselves to this. And so it does mean dismantling and disrupting those crazy tables that we have created, those crazy ways we have created of operating with each other, and then coming to figure out what this new relationship is and can be.
That's going to be hard to follow. Mark, give it your shot.
I know. I'm always trying to come with that science. So we try some stuff here now. I remember one of the sessions when we were talking about access to the Frankie Boston Justice Fund, right? And so to part of what I think would be helpful in answering the question is, when we met the other day, one of the things I think was yesterday, and I was saying like, we talked about the access, right? And so in a previous meeting, I had discussed the fact that access for me meant taking people exactly as they are, right? Too many times, too many funds, too many ways of trying to help people, right? There's these guidelines that people set up that if you don't meet all of these check marks, then we may not be able to help you, right? So maybe you have to come in you have to write a certain way. Like we need a 2,000 word essay from your organization about why why you need this money or why is it important, right? But what if the people who started these three folks all have dyslexia? How are they going to access this money when what they're trying to fight is helping reading and writing in schools, right? But how would they write for this stuff, right? Or somebody who's homeless, who's maybe not as comfortable, or an organization that's helping homeless organizations. How do they access these things in the midst, or access was just so important to me. So I think when you're working with other organizations and you're trying to build that trust, as Kemma said, the authenticity of it is so important. I think I asked before I had said a comment the other day about how this structure for how we develop the fund, not develop the fund, but how we develop the plan on distribution, who the money would go to, what the fund would be used to, right? It could be a model for philanthropy moving forward. And I had asked Omar, like I was saying, well, I noticed that this isn't being recorded. So how would we use this as a model for people if we didn't record it, right? But part of the reason that the trust was built in the group was the fact that we weren't recording the sessions and people felt free enough to actually speak to what they were feeling. And as Kemma said, I think just opening a space before you just tell, you can't just go to people and say, hey, we got $500,000 this year, do with it what you will, right? There needs to be a true purpose behind it that the community believes in. We're all sitting in a world where nobody trusts our elected officials right now, right? So anything that people hear in communities, there's always been an attachment to it, right? There's this fund available for you, but if we give you this money, then we need you to do this for us. That's usually how this has worked. And in order to get the community to buy in, you got to show them that that's not what this is about this time, which can only come from complete culture changes from the philanthropic sector, right? Is understand that this can no longer be telling people, we have this money, we're going to give it to you, but this is what you need to do with it so that we can feel like that money has been spent wisely. That part is what needs to change, which is what changed with this fund, right? We want the community to tell us, okay, these are the important things. This is what the community needs. We want to open up access so that those that have been historically disenfranchised can actually access funds. And I think in this field, we've taken for granted the fact that we think that every organization is actually reaching those cracks and crevices within the counties, within Montgomery County. And as somebody who stood on street corners for an entire year, protesting and talking to people, I can tell you that most of the funds that are intended for good purposes aren't reaching all of the individuals that we need to reach. Those that are actually really down, that are gonna lift us all up as they feel empowered. So if you want, trust is a humongous issue. The only way to break trust is through honesty. It's through having uncomfortable dialogue. It's to bringing people to the table who maybe don't always see eye to eye on certain things, but all have an eye towards real justice for our communities.
Right.
Vanessa.
I don't know what
tough.
I can even add to that, other than, again, my lens as a grantor. I think the unique difference between this community action team and what others may pull together, community members in an advisory capacity, is that it truly is a community action team, and it wasn't a group of individuals that were pulled together simply to give advice and extrapolate information and knowledge from them. It really was, how do you create the table where we honor and respect and trust your opinions and your perspectives, because this is what we want to do on behalf of our community. And I think oftentimes the philanthropic sector will say, I'm going to put an advisory group together and hear what they have to say. And then you translate what you think you want to hear them say or what they are saying. And it's not true, and it's not their voice. And so that was the difference for me when I know how you build trust is there is no agenda other than, I think the keynote speaker this morning said it perfectly, moving together with purpose. And the purpose was in between the words, in between what was spoken. It was viewed from the lens of a faith-based pastor to community organizer to someone already in philanthropy. And we know as a sector, the philanthropic sector, it is about a collective voice. It is about the interdisciplinary across different perspectives. And you can't build trust if you're not willing to cede your power and not show up because you pulled the group together or because you have the money. It really is about authentically listening to what the collective has to say, and the beauty of having someone to moderate it and not translate words that they think would resonate with the sector or resonate with another stakeholder because you want your foundation or you want the sector to still be deeply connected to someone that has political power or something. So you really have to let all that go in order to build trust. And the last thing that I'll say, as a funder, to do this work, this is not about funding a direct service. This is about fundamentally funding a different process to community solution building. And so when you think about it that way, just knowing you're funding a process comes with this level of, I've got to build trust in a different way. And I can't extrapolate information from individuals who are closest to the pain, I think, is one of the slides that Chinwe had. It's you can't just keep extrapolating information and using it for your good and translating it into philanthropic speak. That's sort of what I would say.
We're at time. Thank you so much to our panel. And you can see why the Community Action Team, why HealthSpark Foundation is so excited about the Dr. Frankie Boston Black Justice Fund. One last thing I'll just add here is, as much as it was important to connect with folks and say, what brings you here, what's animating you to be involved in this. As we moved along, we had to make sure that we kept pace with what's going to keep you here and what's going to keep you engaged in this going forward. And that is as important as what brought you here in the first place, because we can, get the engagement and the energy that you heard from these community action team members only if we were connected to what was going to keep them there. And that was action, that was focus, that was clarity, and some other things. So thank you so much. And we'll turn you back for the rest of the day. Take care, y'all.